They thought it would be easy, just another brutal shakedown disguised as routine policing. A cocky, racist cop with too much power and too little conscience targets a black woman, convinced she's just another nobody to intimidate and silence. But this isn't just any woman. She's a high-ranking FBI agent with a reputation for tearing apart corruption from the inside. And when he kicks her to the ground, it's not submission he gets, it's a declaration of war. What follows is a relentless, high-stakes clash where justice isn't just served, it's scorched into the very foundation of their twisted network. And the final twist? It's more brutal and satisfying than you could ever imagine. Stay tuned, because what happens next will leave you breathless. Drop a comment below with your thoughts, and let us know where you're tuning in from. This is a story you don't want to miss. Dr. Vivian Cross stepped out of the glossy black town car with a certain elegance that turned heads on the busy Chicago street. The air was crisp, the November chill slipping under her tailored coat, but she welcomed it. It was one of those rare days when her schedule allowed her a few hours of indulgence, a fleeting respite from the relentless demands of her career. She adjusted her leather gloves and cast a sharp glance over the bustling shopping district. The shops lining the streets sparkled with their luxurious displays, a testament to wealth and exclusivity. Vivian moved with a natural grace, her heels clicking against the polished stone walkway as she approached the boutique she had heard so much about. The storefront was a testament to understated opulence, with its sleek, minimalist design and gleaming glass panels. She pushed open the door, and the cool air inside embraced her, like a whisper of sophistication. The boutique was sparsely populated, mostly with women who wore their privilege like a second skin. Sales associates floated around, dressed impeccably, their voices hushed and smooth like silk. Vivian made her way through the displays, her eyes drawn to a crimson silk scarf that draped elegantly over a mannequin. The fabric looked soft, luxurious. She reached out to touch it, her fingers gliding over the material with an appreciation for quality. For Vivian, days like these were rare. Her work as a renowned behavioral profiler for the FBI demanded precision, patience, and above all, unrelenting focus. The stress was a constant, a low hum beneath the surface that rarely quieted. But here, in this moment, she allowed herself to be just another woman shopping for something beautiful. Not a special agent, not the relentless investigator who had spent years chasing monsters hidden in the darkest corners of society. Just Vivian. She selected the scarf, along with a finely crafted wallet that caught her eye, and approached the register. The cashier greeted her with a warm smile, recognizing her confidence and poise. Vivian paid without hesitation, her credit card gleaming against the black marble counter. The transaction was seamless, uneventful, just the way she liked it. Vivian slid the receipt into her purse and turned to leave, the bag held securely in her hand. As she made her way toward the exit, her gaze swept over the store one last time, admiring the elegance of the decor. She had nearly reached the door when a voice cut through the tranquil atmosphere, sharp and grating. "Excuse me, ma'am." Vivian halted, her eyes narrowing slightly as she turned to face the speaker. He was a white man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a buzz cut that made his head look more like a block of granite than anything human. The badge on his chest gleamed, his uniform pressed to perfection. Officer Thomas Reynolds. She recognized the type instantly, a man who clung to authority like a lifeline, his presence overbearing and his gaze dismissive. "Yes?" Vivian replied, her voice calm, professional. "I need to see your bag," Reynolds said, his tone brusque. There was something ugly in his gaze, something Vivian had seen before in men who wore their power like armor. Her eyebrows lifted. "Excuse me? There's been a report of suspicious activity. I need to make sure you haven't taken anything that doesn't belong to you." Suspicious activity. The words hung in the air like a slap. Vivian held his gaze, her own eyes cool, detached. She had encountered men like him before, arrogant, entitled, convinced their authority granted them the right to scrutinize and judge. "I've paid for my items. The receipt is right here." She reached into her purse and retrieved the thin slip of paper, holding it out to him with a measured patience that took effort to maintain. Reynolds didn't bother to look at it. His eyes stayed locked on her, his mouth curving into a condescending smirk. "Sure, that's what they all say. Let's just take a look and be sure." Vivian's grip on the shopping bag tightened, her fingers curling around the handle. "No," she said, her voice firm but composed. "I've done nothing wrong. I've shown you my receipt. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll be on my way." But Reynolds wasn't willing to let her leave. He stepped into her path, his posture aggressive, his presence stifling. "Hand over the bag. Now." It was a command, not a request. The kind of order he expected her to obey without question. Vivian felt the heat of humiliation prickling at her skin, her pulse quickening. But she forced herself to remain calm. Losing her temper would only play into his hands. "I've shown you my proof of purchase." "I'm not handing over my bag," she replied, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. Reynolds sneered, the expression twisting his face into something unpleasant. "You people always have an excuse, don't you?" He spat, his voice low and tainted with barely concealed disdain. The words hit her like a fist. "You people." A phrase drenched in contempt and prejudice. Vivian's chest tightened, her anger simmering just beneath the surface. But she held it back, her professionalism the only barrier between her and the fury threatening to break free. "Step aside," she said, her voice cold and controlled. "I'm not causing a scene. Let me leave." But Reynolds wasn't interested in letting her go. Without warning, he reached out and grabbed the bag from her hand, yanking it away with a force that nearly sent her stumbling backward. The contents spilled out onto the polished floor, scarlet silk pooling, like blood against the gleaming tiles. Vivian stared at the scattered items, her heart thudding painfully in her chest. She could feel the eyes of the other shoppers on her, their curiosity mingled with judgment. Heat rose to her cheeks, but not from shame, from pure, unfiltered rage. She bent down to gather her belongings, her hands trembling slightly, despite her best efforts to appear calm. It was then that Reynolds did the unthinkable. He kicked her, his boot slamming into her side with a brutality that left her breathless. Pain exploded through her ribs, sharp and immediate. Vivian collapsed to the floor, her hands clutching her side as she fought to breathe. The world around her blurred, voices fading into a distant hum. But through the haze of pain and humiliation, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. This was not over. Vivian lay on the cold marble floor, her breathing ragged and shallow as pain radiated through her ribs. The initial shock of the blow had left her momentarily stunned, her mind struggling to process the brutality of what had just happened. She could taste blood where she had bitten down on her lip to keep from crying out. Around her, the store had gone deathly quiet. Shoppers who moments before had been consumed with their own indulgences now stood frozen, their eyes wide with a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity. A few had their phones raised, cameras pointed directly at her and the uniformed man towering above her. Reynolds's boot hovered threateningly, his face contorted with a twisted satisfaction that made Vivian's stomach churn. She forced herself to sit up, her arms shaking from the effort. The searing pain in her ribs was a constant, burning reminder of his assault. But it wasn't the pain that fueled her. It was the humiliation, the sheer, unfiltered outrage that someone like him dared to put his hands or his boot on her. "What the hell is wrong with you?" The voice came from somewhere behind Reynolds, a man in a well-tailored gray suit, his phone held up to record, stepped forward. His expression was one of outrage and disbelief. "She wasn't doing anything wrong, and you just kicked her. Are you insane?" "Step back," Reynolds barked, his posture stiffening as he turned toward the man. His voice was loud, trying to reassert control. "This is a police matter. You need to mind your own business unless you want to get involved." The man didn't back down. "Involved?" he shot back, his tone cutting. We all saw what you did. That wasn't policing. That was assault. You crossed a line. Vivian noticed more people gathering, their faces a patchwork of concern, disgust, and something else, anticipation. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was a spectacle. And like any spectacle, it demanded an audience. She gritted her teeth and pushed herself up, fighting against the pain that threatened to drag her back down. Her gaze swept over the faces in the crowd, and for the first time, she felt their presence as a weapon rather than a hindrance. Every phone pointed at Reynolds was a potential witness. Every whisper of disapproval was an indictment against him. Reynolds looked around, his eyes darting nervously from phone to phone. His confidence wavered, but his arrogance remained. She refused to comply, he said, his voice raised as if trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. I was just doing my job. Vivian's eyes narrowed. The anger that had simmered beneath her composure now threatened to boil over. But she reined it in, her mind calculating, assessing. This wasn't a situation to be handled with rage. No, this required precision, control. Your job? Vivian's voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd like a knife. She steadied herself, her posture straightening despite the throbbing pain in her side. Your job doesn't include assaulting innocent people, Officer Reynolds. The first showed you my receipt. I complied. You chose to ignore that. Reynolds sneered, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes now. You were acting suspicious. I had every right to question you. No, you didn't. Vivian's words were crisp, each syllable delivered with the authority of someone who had spent years honing her ability to command a room. And you certainly didn't have the right to lay your hands or your feet on me. More voices rose from the crowd, a chorus of agreement swelling around her. Reynolds looked rattled, his shoulders tensing, as if he expected a physical attack. But Vivian had no intention of giving him that satisfaction. Not yet. Are you recording this? Reynolds snapped at the man in the gray suit, his gaze darting to the phone still aimed directly at him. Damn right I am, the man replied, his tone defiant. And so are a dozen other people. Whatever you think you're doing, you're not getting away with it. Put the phone away or I'll arrest you for obstruction, Reynolds growled. But even as he spoke, his bravado seemed to waver. Obstruction? The man laughed bitterly. You attacked her, and now you're threatening me? You're digging yourself a deeper hole with every word. Vivian could see the panic creeping into Reynolds' eyes. He was losing control, his authority eroding with every second that ticked by. And he knew it. The facade of power he had relied on for so long was crumbling beneath the weight of his own arrogance. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, her eyes locking onto his. You've made a mistake, she said, her voice low but clear. A mistake you're going to regret. He barked out a hollow laugh. Mistake? The only mistake here is you thinking you can walk into a store like this and pull off whatever scam you're running. You people always have an excuse. You think flashing a receipt is going to prove anything? Prove? Vivian echoed, her lips curling into a smile that carried no warmth. Oh, I'll prove something, all right. With measured precision, she reached into the inner pocket of her coat, her movements deliberate and slow. Reynolds flinched, his hand twitching toward the holster at his waist. But Vivian didn't pull out a weapon. She produced a slim, black leather case, opening it to reveal her FBI credentials. The gold badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights, the engraved letters spelling out what everyone now understood with brutal clarity. Dr. Vivian Cross. FBI Special Agent. Her voice was sharp, each word laced with a venom that cut deeper than any blow he could have delivered. And now, Officer Reynolds, you will explain to me why you just assaulted a federal agent. Because make no mistake, you will be explaining this to someone, and they'll outrank you by miles. The color drained from Reynolds' face, his bravado evaporating like mist under the relentless glare of the cameras. For the first time, he looked genuinely afraid. I didn't know, he stammered, his gaze darting from her badge to the phones aimed at him like loaded weapons. That's not my problem, Vivian snapped. What's my problem is your abuse of power. And I assure you, it won't be swept under the rug. She watched the fear twist his features, her fury tempered only by the knowledge that this was just the beginning. The man who had so carelessly dismissed her, who had dared to lay his hands on her, was about to find out just how unforgiving justice could be. The icy rage that coursed through Vivian's veins didn't fade as she left the store. It grew. It twisted into something sharper, more focused. As she walked away from the gawking crowd, every step sent a fresh jolt of pain through her ribs. But she didn't falter. She had survived worse than this. And if Officer Thomas Reynolds thought his actions would go unpunished, he was about to be violently disabused of that notion. By the time she reached her car, the pain was a throbbing ache, every breath a reminder of the assault she had just endured. Vivian eased herself into the driver's seat, gritting her teeth as she leaned back against the cool leather. For a moment, she simply sat there, eyes closed, her hands clenched into fists. She would not allow herself the luxury of breaking down. Not here, not now. Her phone buzzed against her thigh, dragging her back to the present. She pulled it from her pocket, her fingers trembling only slightly as she unlocked the screen. A text from her assistant, Charles, blinked on the display. Everything on schedule for the seminar tonight. Shall I prepare your notes? Vivian stared at the words, her vision blurring with a mixture of pain and fury. The seminar. She had nearly forgotten. It was the whole reason she had flown out to Chicago in the first place. A keynote address at a prestigious conference on behavioral analysis. Experts from around the country would be gathered to hear her speak, her reputation as one of the FBI's finest sharpened to a razor's edge. But all she could think about was Reynolds, his smug, entitled face, the dismissive way he had looked at her, as if she were nothing more than a nuisance to be dealt with, a problem to be silenced. Vivian's jaw tightened. She had spent her entire career navigating the treacherous waters of power and prejudice. She had earned her respect the hard way, through skill and perseverance. And she would not allow some small-minded officer to strip that away with one careless act of violence. Her fingers moved over the screen, firing off a text to Charles. Delay my arrival. Something's come up. I'll keep you posted. She ended the message before he could respond, her mind already racing ahead to the next step. Vivian opened her contacts and scrolled until she found the number she needed. It had been a while since she'd used it, but the name was burned into her memory. Special Agent Marcus Holt. Internal Affairs. Vivian pressed the call button and held the phone to her ear, her breathing shallow from both pain and determination. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Vivian? Marcus sounded surprised, but there was warmth in his tone. What's this? The famous Dr. Cross calling me on a Sunday afternoon? Should I be honored or worried? Worried, Vivian replied, her voice cold and clipped. Something happened, and I need you to help me make sure the bastard responsible never wears a badge again. Marcus's tone sobered, instantly. Tell me everything. Vivian recounted the encounter with Reynolds in precise clinical detail, her words stripped of emotion but laced with the fury that simmered just beneath her calm exterior. As she spoke, Marcus remained silent, listening with the kind of intensity she had always admired about him. Jesus, Vivian, he finally said, his voice tight with anger. He kicked you? Are you all right? I'll survive, she said dismissively, but I won't be satisfied until that man is held accountable. You know me, Marcus. I don't make empty threats. He attacked a federal agent, and I have witnesses, footage, everything you need to bury him. Good. Marcus's voice was grim. I'll get the ball rolling. Send me everything you have, videos, statements, whatever you can collect. This prick is about to find out just how unforgiving the Bureau can be when one of its own is assaulted. Vivian allowed herself a faint, humorless smile. I was hoping you'd say that. I'll send you the files within the hour. Consider it handled. And Vivian, make sure you get those ribs checked out. I can hear it in your voice, you're hurting more than you're letting on. She wanted to argue, to tell him she was fine. But Marcus had always seen through her bravado. "I'll take care of it," she said, her voice softening just a fraction. "And, Marcus, thank you." "Anytime," he replied. "Take care of yourself. And send me those files. The sooner we get this rolling, the better." Vivian ended the call and allowed herself a moment to breathe. Her chest ached from more than just the physical pain. It was the weight of humiliation, the festering anger that Reynolds's actions had unleashed. But she wouldn't be consumed by it. No, she would channel it, use it. She scrolled through her phone, opening the camera roll. Footage taken by onlookers had already begun to trickle in, sent by strangers who had witnessed the incident and had somehow managed to track her down. Most of the videos were shaky, but the content was clear enough. Reynolds standing over her, his face twisted in contempt. The moment of the kick captured in horrifying detail. Vivian forwarded everything to Marcus, her fingers steady as she typed out a brief message, evidence attached. "Keep me updated." Satisfied, she set the phone down and closed her eyes, inhaling deeply through her nose and exhaling through her mouth. The pain had dulled to a manageable throb, but she knew she needed medical attention. Reynolds had kicked her hard enough to cause damage, but the thought of going to a hospital, of sitting around waiting for X-rays and paperwork, was almost unbearable. She reached into the glove compartment and retrieved a bottle of aspirin, dry swallowing 2 pills before leaning back in her seat. The cold anger she felt earlier had settled into something steadier, more focused. Vivian opened her eyes, her gaze hardening as she looked at her own reflection in the rearview mirror. This wasn't just about her, it was about something much bigger. She had dedicated her life to rooting out darkness, to exposing monsters who hid behind masks of civility. And she would not allow a uniform to shield a man like Reynolds from the consequences of his actions. With a groan of pain, she started the engine. Her destination wasn't the hospital, it was her hotel room, a place where she could regroup, gather her thoughts, and prepare for the battle to come. Because there was no doubt in her mind, this was a battle, and she intended to win. The evening unfolded with a relentless chill, darkness settling over the city like a shroud. From her hotel room on the 25th floor, Vivian stared out at the glittering expanse of Chicago's skyline. The city looked peaceful from this height, its bustling energy muted to nothing more than a low hum. But beneath that polished veneer, corruption and arrogance thrived. She had seen it time and time again, in big cities and small towns alike. Authority abused, power unchecked, men like Thomas Reynolds given free rein to trample over the dignity of others with no fear of consequence. Tonight, that would change. Her laptop hummed to life as she powered it on, her fingers moving with a controlled urgency. Marcus had already emailed her a list of preliminary steps he'd initiated, a formal complaint filed, notifications sent to the department's Internal Affairs Division. It was a start, but Vivian intended to do more than just file a complaint. She wanted repercussions. She wanted justice. She clicked through the videos people had sent her, eyes sharp, as she cataloged each one. Multiple angles, some clearer than others, but all depicting the same damning act. Reynolds towering over her, his boot lashing out with calculated brutality. The sound of her own gasp, caught on tape, was more humiliating than she expected. But it was also fuel. Another video, taken from a closer angle, caught his sneer perfectly as he kicked her. The hatred in his expression was unmistakable. Vivian paused the footage, her gaze locked onto his face. It was a face she would not forget. Nor would she forgive. The messages from witnesses had been pouring in since the moment she left the store. Strangers offering their footage, their sympathy, their anger on her behalf. And while the support was appreciated, it did nothing to dull the fire burning within her. She wasn't interested in sympathy. She was interested in accountability. Her phone buzzed, pulling her attention away from the laptop screen. A text from Marcus. "Got your files. This is bad, Vivian. IA will probably try to stall it. Too many people are going to be embarrassed if this gets out." She typed back, her fingers stabbing at the screen with more force than necessary. It's already out. The footage is spreading online. This won't be buried. A pause, then Marcus's reply. Good. Just be careful. These things can get messy. Especially when egos are involved. Vivian's lips thinned. She knew exactly what he meant. There would be backlash. Not just from Reynolds, but from the entire system that had enabled him. The old boys' network that thrived on shielding its own. The problem wasn't just Reynolds, it was the infrastructure that allowed men like him to operate with impunity. But Vivian had spent her career unraveling systems like that. She thrived on finding the cracks, the weak points that would bring everything tumbling down. And this time, the stakes were personal. She opened another browser tab and began typing, her fingers steady and precise. There was a contact within the Department of Justice. She trusted a woman named Sarah Kim, who had spent years investigating police misconduct. Vivian had worked with her on a joint operation 5 years earlier, and while they hadn't kept in touch, the mutual respect between them had been genuine. Vivian composed the email with a ruthless efficiency, outlining the incident, attaching the videos, and making it clear that she expected immediate action. This wasn't just about her being assaulted, it was about a culture of unchecked authority that needed to be eradicated. Satisfied, she hit send and leaned back in her chair, her ribs protesting at the movement. The painkillers she had taken earlier were starting to wear off, the dull ache building into something sharper, but she ignored it. Pain was temporary. Justice, if done right, could be permanent. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a notification from social media. Someone had tagged her in a post, a video clip of the incident, uploaded by a bystander who had recognized her. The caption was a fiery condemnation of police brutality, demanding justice for the FBI agent assaulted by a racist cop. Vivian scrolled through the comments, her expression unreadable. Some were supportive, others dismissive. The usual rhetoric played out in real-time arguments over race, authority, and accountability. But what struck her most was the sheer volume of it. This wasn't going to be ignored. She closed the app and returned to her laptop, her attention shifting to a different set of files, background checks, personnel records. Everything she could find about Officer Thomas Reynolds. It didn't take long to uncover a troubling pattern. Reynolds had been the subject of at least 6 formal complaints in the past 3 years. Excessive force, verbal harassment, even allegations of planting evidence. And yet, every single complaint had been dismissed, labeled as unsubstantiated or buried under layers of bureaucratic red tape. Vivian's fingers tightened around the edge of her laptop. It was exactly what she had suspected. Reynolds wasn't just a bad cop, he was a symptom of something much worse. A system designed to protect itself at the expense of the people it was meant to serve. She made a list of names. The officers who had filed the reports, the supervisors who had dismissed them, the internal affairs investigators who had conveniently found no wrongdoing. Every name was a thread to be pulled, and she intended to unravel them all. Another email from Marcus popped up on her screen. Vivian, this is gaining traction faster than I expected. I just got a call from Reynolds Precinct. They're trying to spin it as a misunderstanding. Damage control mode. Her reply was immediate. Let them try. The truth is already out. A brief pause. Then another message. You should probably prepare for retaliation. Reynolds isn't going to take this lying down. And neither will his buddies. Vivian's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. She had faced worse enemies than Reynolds. People far more powerful, far more dangerous. If he thought she would back down, then he had grossly underestimated her. Let them come. She glanced at her laptop, her fingers tapping out a rhythm against the keys. There was more to do. More reports to sift through. More threads to unravel. But exhaustion was creeping in, her body reminding her that it had limits even if her mind refused to acknowledge them. With reluctance, Vivian closed her laptop and eased herself onto the bed, her limbs heavy with fatigue. Her eyes drifted shut, but her thoughts remained sharp, focused. The pain in her ribs pulsed in time with her heartbeat, but she welcomed it. It was a reminder of why she was fighting. and why she would not stop until Reynolds was brought to justice. Sleep claimed her eventually, but it was a restless, fractured thing. And when she woke the next morning, she felt no less driven, no less determined. The battle had only just begun. Vivian awoke to the sharp, grating sound of her phone, buzzing insistently on the nightstand. She forced her eyes open, the pale morning light seeping through the thick curtains of her hotel room. For a moment, she felt disoriented, the events of the previous day crashing back into her mind like a tidal wave. She reached for her phone, her fingers stiff and aching. The screen flashed with missed calls and text messages, most from Marcus, some from Sarah Kim, and a few from numbers she didn't recognize. News outlets, she guessed. The media had caught wind of what had happened, and they were hungry for a statement. Vivian ignored them all, her focus zeroing in on Marcus's most recent message. "We need to talk, now." She dialed his number and pressed the phone to her ear, her heartbeat steady but her mind already racing. He picked up on the second ring. "Vivian," Marcus's voice came through, his tone strained and urgent. "I just got off a call with Internal Affairs. They're already trying to sweep this under the rug." "Of course they are," she replied coolly. "The footage is circulating online. They're probably more interested in damage control than actual justice." "It's worse than that," Marcus said, his voice dropping. "Reynolds has friends in high places. Some of them are pushing to have you discredited. They're spinning this as you overreacting, claiming you provoked him." Vivian's jaw clenched, the muscles in her neck tightening painfully. "Provoked him?" Her voice was low, icy. "The man kicked me, Marcus. He physically assaulted me after I complied with his orders. How the hell could I have provoked him?" "They're not interested in the truth," Marcus said grimly. "They're interested in protecting one of their own, and if that means tearing you down in the process, they'll do it without hesitation." Vivian felt her anger flare, hot and fierce. "Let them try. The footage is clear, and there are witnesses, people willing to testify. They'll do everything they can to discredit those witnesses," Marcus warned. "Or intimidate them into silence. You know how these things go. It's a dirty game, and Reynolds isn't playing alone." "Neither am I," Vivian shot back. "I have the truth on my side, and I have you. I'm not backing down, Marcus. Not from him. Not from any of them." "Good," Marcus said, and she could hear the approval in his voice. "But you need to be careful. Reynolds has already filed a formal complaint against you, claiming you threatened him. He's trying to paint you as the aggressor." Vivian nearly laughed at the absurdity of it. "He's grasping at straws. If that's all he has, then he's already lost." "Maybe," Marcus admitted. "But he's not the one you need to worry about. It's the people backing him. They'll dig into your past, your cases, anything they can twist to their advantage." "Let them," Vivian replied. "My record is clean. And if they think I'll roll over and accept this, they've picked the wrong woman to target." "Just watch your back," Marcus said, his concern evident. "I'm working on this from my end, but the pushback is stronger than I expected. They're scared, Vivian. And scared people do stupid, dangerous things." "I appreciate the warning," she said, her tone softening just a fraction. "But I'm not afraid of them. They should be afraid of me." Marcus chuckled, a dark, humorless sound. "They will be. Just make sure you don't end up a casualty in their little war." Vivian ended the call and set the phone aside, her mind churning with 1,000 different thoughts. Marcus was right. They would come after her. They would smear her name, twist the narrative, and do everything they could to undermine her credibility. But they would not succeed. Vivian rose from the bed, her ribs protesting the sudden movement. She winced, but forced herself to ignore the pain. It was a reminder of why she was fighting, a reminder of what Reynolds had done, and why she couldn't afford to let him walk away unscathed. She showered quickly, the hot water doing little to ease the tension in her muscles. After dressing in a simple black blouse and slacks, she sat back down at her laptop, her fingers flying over the keys as she composed another email, this one addressed directly to Sarah Kim. They're trying to bury this. Reynolds has friends in high places, and they're already pushing back. I need your help. I need this to be official. I need them to understand that I won't be silenced. If they think I'll go away quietly, they're wrong. I need you to push this forward, Sarah, as high up the chain as it needs to go. She hit send, her eyes burning with intensity. The fight was escalating faster than she had anticipated, but she was prepared. She had spent her entire career hunting down predators, dismantling criminal enterprises, exposing corruption wherever it hid. This was no different. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call from an unfamiliar number. Vivian hesitated, her instincts sharpening. Finally, she answered, her voice calm and controlled. Dr. Cross. Well, the voice drawled, thick with smugness. The famous FBI agent herself. Making quite the scene, aren't you? Who is this? Vivian demanded, though she already had a sinking suspicion. An interested party, the man replied. Word travels fast, especially when certain people are, let's say, displeased with your antics. You're stirring up trouble where none is needed. Why don't you do everyone a favor and drop this nonsense before it gets ugly? Vivian's grip tightened on the phone. Is that a threat? It's advice, the voice countered. Good advice. There are people who'd be more than happy to see you removed from the equation, permanently. Vivian's pulse quickened, but her voice remained steady. I don't respond well to threats or advice. So whoever you are, you can take your warning and shove it. A low chuckle rumbled through the phone. You're making a mistake, Dr. Cross. Just walk away. No one will think less of you for it. In fact, most would thank you for knowing when to keep your mouth shut. Goodbye, Vivian said, her voice flat as she ended the call. She stared at her phone for a moment, her mind racing. Whoever that was, they weren't bluffing. This was bigger than Reynolds. There were forces at play she hadn't accounted for. But instead of fear, the threat only solidified her resolve. They wanted her to walk away. They were going to be sorely disappointed. Vivian spent the next few hours buried in research, her eyes locked onto the glowing screen of her laptop as she sifted through every file she could access. There were patterns emerging, ones she had seen before, a web of favoritism and corruption wound tightly around Reynolds and his ilk, shielding them from the consequences of their own actions. It was the same sickening playbook she had encountered throughout her career, and she intended to dismantle it piece by piece. Her phone buzzed with another message from Marcus. Just got word that Reynolds is meeting with his superiors this afternoon. They're circling the wagons. Damage control is in full effect. Vivian smirked at the text, her fingers typing out a swift reply. Good. Let them scramble. They're playing defense, which means they're already losing. Marcus's response was immediate. Be careful, Vivian. Desperate people do desperate things. She didn't bother replying. She knew Marcus was right, but fear wasn't a luxury she could afford. Her attention was drawn back to the files she had uncovered. Reynolds had a history of complaints, most of them involving excessive force or inappropriate conduct. But the sheer number of times his record had been scrubbed clean was staggering. 6 separate incidents over the past 5 years. Every complaint filed against him, dismissed as unsubstantiated or lacking evidence. Vivian's lips pressed into a thin line as she compiled the information, her determination hardening with each new discovery. But what was even more troubling were the names attached to the investigation's people who had swept Reynolds's behavior under the rug, time and time again. It was a pattern she recognized all too well. A network of protectors, each of them more concerned with preserving their reputation than upholding justice. Vivian made a list. Supervisors, internal affairs investigators, even fellow officers who had vouched for Reynolds despite damning evidence to the contrary. If Reynolds thought he could hide behind their protection, he was sorely mistaken. She intended to expose every last one of them. She leaned back in her chair, her ribs protesting the movement. The pain was a constant reminder of what had happened. But it was also fuel, motivation. The knock on her hotel room door was unexpected. Vivian's eyes narrowed as she glanced at the digital clock on the nightstand. She hadn't ordered room service, and Marcus would have called before showing up unannounced. Her mind raced through possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. She approached the door cautiously, her hand reaching for the gun she kept in her purse. With her other hand, she checked the peephole. A man stood outside, his expression tense, eyes darting nervously down the hallway. He was young, mid-20s, with a thin frame and a pale, gaunt face. "Who is it?" Vivian called, her voice sharp. I have information," the man stammered, his voice muffled through the door. About Reynolds. "Please, I need to talk to you." Vivian's grip tightened around her weapon. It could be a trap, or worse, some pathetic attempt at intimidation. But something about the man's tone gave her pause. There was fear in his voice, genuine fear. She hesitated before unlocking the door, her posture rigid and unyielding as she cracked it open just enough to see him clearly. "Who are you?" she demanded. "My name's Eric Dawson," the man replied, his eyes wide and desperate. "I work at the precinct. I saw what happened to you yesterday, and I need your help." "Why should I believe anything you have to say?" Vivian asked, her gaze cold and untrusting. Because they're coming after you," Eric said, his words tumbling out in a panicked rush. "I heard them talking. Reynolds and his buddies. They're planning something. They want to make sure you don't talk. And if that means silencing you permanently." Vivian's jaw clenched. "Who's involved?" "Reynolds, obviously," Eric continued, his voice trembling. "But it's more than just him. His Sergeant Mason, he's been covering for Reynolds for years. And it's not just because they're friends. Reynolds has dirt on him. Something big. I don't know the details, but Mason's terrified of it coming out." Vivian studied the young man's face, searching for any sign of deceit. But all she saw was raw, unfiltered terror. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice a fraction softer. "Because," Eric hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Because I was one of the guys who helped cover up Reynolds's messes. I did what I was told, kept my mouth shut. But this, what he did to you, it's not right. And now they're trying to make it all go away like it never happened." Vivian's eyes narrowed. "So, you've had a change of heart? Just like that?" "I was scared," Eric admitted, his shoulders sagging. "Still am. But I can't keep lying for them. Not after what I saw. Not after the way they're trying to destroy you just to protect their own asses." Vivian considered his words, her mind already spinning through the possibilities. If Eric was telling the truth, then Reynolds's network of protectors went deeper than she'd realized. And if they were planning something, she needed to be prepared. "What exactly did you hear them say?" she asked, her voice tight with urgency. "Reynolds was bragging to some of the guys last night," Eric explained. "Said you were finished. That they were going to make sure you never worked another day in your life. And if that didn't shut you up, well," his voice cracked, the unspoken threat hanging heavy between them. Vivian's fists clenched, her nails digging into her palms. "You realize what you're doing, don't you? Coming to me like this. They'll destroy you if they find out you talked." "I know," Eric whispered, his eyes glassy with desperation. "But I can't just stand by and do nothing. Not anymore." Vivian took a long, measured breath, her gaze never leaving his. He was scared, that much was clear. But fear could be a powerful motivator. And if he was willing to betray Reynolds, then maybe there was more truth to his words than she had initially thought. "All right," she said finally. "You're going to tell me everything you know. Every name, every detail, no matter how small. And you're not going to leave anything out. Understood?" Eric nodded frantically, his relief palpable. "Yes. Whatever you need. Just please help me." Vivian stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Come in, and lock the door behind you." Eric did as he was told, his shoulders trembling as he stepped inside. Vivian closed the door and turned to face him, her expression hardened by a determination that had only grown stronger. They wanted her to back down, to walk away, but now she had a new weapon, and she intended to use it. Eric paced back and forth across the carpeted floor of Vivian's hotel room, his agitation palpable. His hands trembled slightly, his eyes darting around the room as if expecting Reynolds to burst through the door at any moment. Vivian watched him carefully, her own mind whirring with possibilities. His fear was genuine of that. She had no doubt. But genuine fear didn't always translate to honesty. "Sit down," Vivian said, her voice calm but edged with command. "You're not helping yourself by acting like a trapped animal." Eric stopped pacing and dropped into the armchair by the window, his fingers clutching the armrests so tightly his knuckles turned white. He swallowed, his throat working convulsively as he tried to gather his thoughts. "You said Reynolds is planning something," Vivian prompted. "Something to make sure I don't talk. You need to be more specific. What exactly did you hear?" Eric hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. They were talking about making sure you didn't get a chance to testify or file any official complaints. Mason said they'd already put pressure on some of the people who took videos, tried to get them to delete the footage or recant their statements. "Did it work?" Vivian asked, her eyes narrowing. "Some of them, yeah," Eric admitted, shame coloring his cheeks. "But not all. Too many copies were made. Too many people saw what happened, so Reynolds got desperate. He was ranting last night about how you were making him look like some kind of monster, and how he was going to put you down before you destroyed him." Vivian felt a cold, creeping chill slide down her spine. "Put me down?" she repeated, her voice steady but laced with steel. "He didn't say exactly how," Eric continued, his words tumbling over one another in his rush to explain. "But there was talk of making you disappear. Mason didn't like the idea, said it was too risky. But Reynolds, he's losing it. He thinks you're trying to ruin his life, and he's not going to let that happen." Vivian allowed herself a single, bitter laugh. "I'm not trying to ruin his life. I'm trying to make sure he faces the consequences of his actions. But I suppose that's the same thing to someone like him." Eric looked at her, his expression stricken. "You don't understand. This isn't just about Reynolds. It's about everyone who's protected him, covered for him. If you bring him down, you bring them down too. And they're not going to let that happen without a fight." "I expected as much," Vivian replied. "But the fact that you came here tells me there's more. Something you haven't told me yet." Eric's shoulders sagged, his gaze dropping to his lap. "I'm scared," he whispered. "If they find out I came to you—" "They will find out," Vivian said bluntly. "That's inevitable. The only question is whether you're willing to do something about it before that happens. You came to me for a reason, so talk." Eric swallowed again, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "Reynolds has connections outside the department, people who owe him favors. He was bragging last night that if you kept pushing, he'd make a call and have you taken care of." Vivian's expression remained unchanged, but inside her pulse quickened. "What kind of connections?" "Criminals," Eric said, his voice a strained whisper. "Drug dealers, gang members, people he's helped out in the past by looking the other way. They owe him, and he's not above calling in those favors if it means saving his own skin." Vivian nodded, her mind racing. The situation was worse than she had thought. Reynolds was more desperate and more dangerous than she had anticipated. But desperation could also be a weakness, one she could exploit if she played her cards right. "And Mason?" she asked. "How far is he willing to go to protect Reynolds?" "Far enough," Eric admitted, his shoulders slumping. "He's not as crazy as Reynolds, but he's willing to do whatever it takes to keep things quiet. I overheard him telling Reynolds to keep a low profile, to wait until the heat dies down before making a move. But Reynolds, he's impatient. And he's pissed off. That's a bad combination." Vivian studied Eric's face, searching for any hint of deception. But he seemed genuine. Desperate, terrified, but genuine. She leaned forward, her gaze locking onto his. "Eric, if you want me to help you, I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you telling me everything you know? Every name? Every detail?" He nodded frantically. "Yes, I swear. I've told you everything. I don't want to be a part of this anymore. I didn't sign up for this kind of shit. Covering for Reynolds was bad enough, but what they're planning. You did sign up for this, Vivian interrupted, her voice cutting through his rambling like a blade. The moment you agreed to cover for Reynolds, you made yourself part of the problem. But if you're willing to help me bring him down, then maybe you can make things right. Eric's face crumpled, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I didn't know it would go this far. I thought it was just guys watching out for each other, but it's so much worse than that. Yes, it is, Vivian said. And it's people like you, people who see what's happening but stay silent, who allow it to continue. If you want redemption, Eric, you have to earn it. Are you willing to do that? He hesitated, his gaze flickering to the door, as if considering bolting from the room. But then he nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I'll do whatever it takes. Good. Vivian's voice was as cold and unforgiving as steel, because this isn't just about me. It's about every person Reynolds has hurt. Every person who's been silenced because of people like Mason and their cover-ups. If you want to make a difference, this is your chance. What do you want me to do? Eric asked, his tone laced with equal parts fear and determination. Vivian leaned back, her expression thoughtful. First, you're going to write down everything you know. Names, dates, conversations, everything. Then, you're going to help me take this to the people who can actually do something about it. Eric's eyes widened. You mean, go public? No. Vivian's gaze was sharp and unyielding. We're going to take this to the Department of Justice. And we're going to bring Reynolds' entire network crashing down around him. Vivian stared at Eric, her mind already dissecting every word he had spoken. He looked small, broken, his shoulders slumped, as if the weight of his own betrayal threatened to crush him. But she couldn't afford to waste sympathy on him. Not yet. If he wanted redemption, he would have to earn it. Write down everything you know, she instructed. I need details, conversations, names, dates. The more thorough you are, the better our chances of tearing them apart. Eric nodded, his fingers trembling as he reached for the notepad and pen she offered. He hunched over, scribbling frantically, his brow furrowed with concentration. Vivian watched him carefully, her own mind racing through the possibilities. Marcus would need to be updated. The Department of Justice would require solid evidence before launching a formal investigation, and Vivian intended to hand them more than enough ammunition to burn Reynolds and his enablers to the ground. The minutes stretched into an hour as Eric poured out his knowledge onto the pages. His handwriting grew increasingly messy, his anxiety evident in the frantic strokes of the pen. Finally, he set the notepad down, his hands shaking from the effort. That's everything I can remember, he said, his voice strained. I swear I haven't left anything out. Vivian picked up the notepad and scanned the pages, her eyes narrowing as she absorbed the information. Names she recognized, others she didn't. But the pattern was clear. A network of complicity, woven through the precinct like a cancer. Mason, Reynolds' sergeant, was at the center of it, covering for his subordinates, burying complaints, intimidating witnesses. It was all there, laid out in Eric's scrawled handwriting. And beyond Mason, there were others. Supervisors who looked the other way, investigators who deliberately botched their own inquiries. It was systemic, pervasive, and utterly infuriating. You've given me a lot to work with, Vivian said, her tone measured. But this is only the beginning. What you've provided is valuable, but it's not enough on its own. We need corroboration, documentation, records that prove what you're telling me is true. Eric's face fell. I don't know how to get that. They control everything. The reports, the files, they make things disappear when it suits them. Then we'll find another way, Vivian replied. Are you willing to testify? Publicly, if it comes to that? His eyes widened with fear. If they find out I'm talking to you, they will find out, Vivian interrupted. You already know that. The question is whether you're willing to stand up and do what's right, even when it costs you. Eric's mouth opened and closed, his expression torn between terror and something that might have been resolve. Finally, he nodded. Yes, I'll testify. Whatever you need. Vivian inclined her head, acknowledging his courage. However flawed and compromised his motives might have been, he was taking a risk now. And that meant something. Good, she said. I'm going to contact a friend of mine at the Department of Justice. She specializes in cases like this. Corruption, misconduct, abuse of power. If anyone can help us, it's her. Eric nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. What do I do in the meantime? Stay out of sight, Vivian advised. Go somewhere they won't think to look for you. And keep your phone on. I'll be in touch once I have more information. Eric hesitated before rising to his feet. You really think you can bring them down? I know I can, Vivian replied, her voice steady and sure. But only if you're willing to follow through. No more second guessing. No more backing out. I won't, Eric whispered. I can't live with myself if I do. Then prove it, Vivian said, her gaze hard as iron. Now go, before someone figures out you're here. Eric left the room without another word, his steps hurried and uneven. Vivian waited until she heard the faint click of the door closing behind him before releasing a slow, measured breath. She reached for her phone and dialed Marcus's number, her fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. He picked up on the first ring. Vivian, Marcus greeted, his voice carrying the same strained urgency she had come to expect. I was just about to call you. Things are getting worse on my end. What's happened? She asked, her tone clipped. The precinct is in full-blown panic mode, Marcus said. Reynolds has been suspended pending investigation, but they're trying to downplay it, claiming it's just a procedural review. Nothing serious. They're buying time, Vivian said, trying to keep things quiet while they figure out how to spin it. Exactly, Marcus replied. But that's not the worst of it. I've been hearing whispers, people suggesting that you're unstable, that you overreacted. They're trying to discredit you, Vivian. I expected that, she said, her voice calm. It's the standard playbook. Attack the accuser to protect the guilty. It's more than that, Marcus warned. They're trying to frame this as a personal vendetta, that you're targeting Reynolds because of some grudge. I've already heard people throwing around words like unprofessional and biased. Vivian's lips tightened. Let them. The evidence will speak for itself. Evidence isn't always enough, Marcus said, his voice low. You know that better than anyone. That's why I need your help, Vivian replied. I have a witness, one of Reynolds' own colleagues. He's willing to testify, but we need more. Records, documents, proof that Reynolds and his protectors have been covering up misconduct for years. Marcus was silent for a moment. That's a tall order. If they've been burying evidence, it's going to take time to dig it back up. Then start digging, Vivian said, her tone sharp. I'm not waiting around while they try to destroy me. If Reynolds and his network want to fight, then I'll give them one. But I need you on my side, Marcus. Are you with me? You know I am, Marcus replied, his voice steady. But be careful, Vivian. You're making powerful enemies. They made me their enemy the moment they tried to silence me, she countered. And now they're going to pay for that mistake. Understood, Marcus said. I'll start pulling what I can. And Vivian, watch your back. They're getting desperate. I'm counting on it, Vivian replied. Desperate people make mistakes, and I'll be there to catch every single one. She ended the call, her fingers trembling only slightly as she set the phone down. The battle lines were drawn, the stakes were higher than ever, and Vivian was ready to see it through to the end, no matter what it cost her. Vivian felt the exhaustion creeping into her bones, a heavy weight that threatened to drag her down. But she refused to let it claim her. Not now, not when she was so close to tearing apart the very structure that had protected Reynolds and his accomplices for years. Eric's testimony had been invaluable. Names, dates, locations, all of it laid out before her like pieces of a puzzle. But now came the harder part, connecting those pieces and ensuring they formed a picture that no one could deny. Vivian knew the system would do everything in its power to shield itself from scrutiny. That was the nature of bureaucracy. But she was prepared to dismantle it brick by brick if necessary. She had spent the last few days gathering evidence, reaching out to contacts she hadn't spoken to in years, leveraging every connection she could muster. Marcus had been her most reliable ally, feeding her information from within internal affairs. But even his resources were limited, constrained by the very system he was trying to undermine. Her phone rang, the sudden intrusion breaking the silence of her hotel room. Vivian glanced at the screen, her eyes narrowing at the unfamiliar number. But she answered it anyway, her voice clipped and cautious. "Dr. Cross. Vivian, it's Sarah." The voice on the other end was tight, strained with urgency. "We need to talk. Now." Vivian's stomach tightened. She had been waiting for this call, bracing for it. "I'm listening. I've been digging through the files you sent me, cross-referencing them with our own records," Sarah said, her words rushing out in a breathless torrent. "And what I found, it's worse than I thought. Reynolds isn't just some bad cop acting on his own. He's part of a much larger operation, one that goes all the way up the chain." Vivian's grip on the phone tightened. "How high are we talking?" "At least 2 precinct commanders," Sarah replied. "Possibly more. Reynolds has been protected by people in positions of authority for years. Every time a complaint was filed, it was rerouted, buried, or altered to make him look clean. And those doing the covering up weren't just his direct superiors. They were people with real power, people who could manipulate the system from above. Vivian felt a cold rage settle over her, sharp and unforgiving. "And now, they're trying to bury me along with it." "Exactly," Sarah confirmed. "Your name's already been flagged in certain circles. They're painting you as a rogue agent, someone who overstepped her authority. They're hoping to discredit you before you can gather enough evidence to expose the entire network." Vivian's jaw clenched. "Then we need to move faster, before they can shut me down." "That's why I called," Sarah said. "I have a contact in the Department of Justice, someone who specializes in organized corruption cases. If we can present them with enough evidence, they'll launch a full-scale investigation. But we need to act now, before Reynolds's protectors can cover their tracks." "I have what you need," Vivian replied. "Testimonies, documents, recordings, enough to at least get their attention." "It'll have to be more than just attention," Sarah warned. "They'll need proof. Solid, irrefutable proof. And even then, it's going to be a fight. These people are entrenched. They've spent years building their little empire. Then we'll tear it down," Vivian said, her voice low and fierce. "Every last piece of it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Sarah's voice came back, laced with determination. "Send me everything you have. I'll get it into the right hands. But you need to be careful. If they find out what you're doing—" "They already know," Vivian interrupted. "Reynolds and his allies aren't being subtle. They've made threats, tried to intimidate witnesses. But it's not going to work. Not this time." "Good," Sarah replied. "But be prepared for retaliation. They're desperate, and desperate people do stupid, dangerous things." "I'm counting on it," Vivian said. "The more reckless they get, the more mistakes they'll make. And I'll be there to catch every single one." "I'll be in touch," Sarah promised. "And Vivian, stay safe. They're going to come after you. Hard." "Let them try," Vivian replied. "I'm not going down without a fight." The call ended, but the tension remained. Vivian felt the weight of everything pressing down on her shoulders, but she refused to buckle under the strain. Instead, she channeled it into a cold, relentless focus. She spent the next several hours compiling every piece of evidence she had gathered. Documents, audio recordings, witness testimonies. Each file was meticulously organized, labeled, and cross-referenced. Vivian's eyes burned from staring at the screen for so long, but she couldn't stop. Not when the finish line was so close. Her phone vibrated again, this time with a message from Marcus. "They're getting desperate," Just heard Reynolds is trying to rally support from his allies. Mason's pulling strings to protect him. They know you're closing in. Vivian typed back a quick response. Let them panic. The more they scramble, the more mistakes they'll make. Keep me updated. The reply was immediate. You got it. But watch your back, Vivian. They're running out of options. That makes them dangerous. She tossed her phone onto the bed and rubbed her temples, her mind a blur of strategy and counter-strategy. Everything she had learned, everything she had uncovered, pointed to one conclusion. Reynolds and his protectors were willing to do whatever it took to keep their secrets buried. But Vivian had come too far to back down now. She had uncovered the rot at the heart of the precinct, exposed the corruption that had allowed men like Reynolds to operate with impunity, and she wasn't going to stop until every last one of them was brought to justice. The darkness outside her window deepened, the city's lights flickering like distant stars. Vivian's fingers hovered over her keyboard, her thoughts coalescing into a single, unwavering purpose. This wasn't just about revenge. It wasn't even about justice. It was about sending a message that no one was above the law. Not Reynolds, not Mason, not the precinct commanders who had conspired to protect them. Vivian hit send, her files shooting off into the digital ether toward Sarah's waiting inbox. The evidence was out of her hands now, entrusted to someone she hoped was still an ally. But even if Sarah faltered, even if the Department of Justice turned a blind eye, Vivian would find another way, because this fight was far from over, and she intended to see it through to the bitter end. The storm hit just before midnight. It wasn't the rain or the thunder, but the sudden, vicious retaliation from Reynolds and his allies. Vivian had expected them to lash out, but their desperation had made them reckless, and that was something she intended to use to her advantage. Her phone erupted with calls and messages, some from Marcus, others from Sarah, and a few from numbers she didn't recognize. But one message stood out, its tone so stark and urgent that it sent a chill straight down her spine. They're coming for you. Get out, now. The text came from Marcus, but the meaning was crystal clear. They weren't just coming for her career, they were coming for her. Vivian grabbed her laptop, her phone, and the files she had been organizing over the last several days. Her fingers trembled only slightly as she shoved them into her bag, her mind already calculating her next move. She had always known it might come to this, that Reynolds and his protectors would try to eliminate her before she could expose them, but the ferocity of their response told her everything she needed to know. She had hit a nerve, and now they were panicking. Vivian checked the hallway through the peephole before slipping out of her hotel room. She kept her head down, her posture casual but purposeful as she made her way toward the elevator. It was late, the corridors quiet and empty, but that only heightened her sense of unease. She hit the button for the lobby and waited, her ears straining for the sound of approaching footsteps. Every creak of the building, every distant voice felt like a warning, but the elevator doors opened without incident, and she stepped inside, her fingers brushing the concealed weapon at her side. The descent was agonizingly slow, her pulse thrumming in her ears. She tried to focus, her mind racing through possibilities and contingencies. Marcus had warned her they were coming, but how many? And from which direction? She couldn't afford to be caught off guard. The elevator dinged softly as it reached the lobby. Vivian stepped out, her gaze sweeping the area with practiced precision. The night clerk glanced up from his desk, his expression bored and indifferent. Good. That meant they hadn't reached her yet. She moved through the lobby with swift, measured steps, her eyes flicking to every corner, every shadow. When she reached the glass doors that led outside, her phone vibrated in her pocket. She ignored it. There was no time. The street was quiet, the city's usual chaos muted by the late hour. Vivian made her way to the parking garage, her footsteps echoing against the concrete. Her rental car was parked on the third level, tucked away near the far end of the structure. Too far. Every second felt like a lifetime. She reached her car and slid into the driver's seat, her fingers shaking as she jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, and she peeled out of the garage with a recklessness she rarely allowed herself. Vivian's phone continued to buzz, but she didn't answer until she was several blocks away, the lights of the city blurring past her. When she finally picked up, Marcus's voice exploded through the speaker. "Vivian, where the hell are you?" Heading out of the city, she replied, her tone clipped. "You were right. They made their move." "Damn it," Marcus swore. "They're calling in favors all over the place. Even the DOJ contact you mentioned, Sarah, she's being pressured to back off. They're pulling out all the stops to bury this." "Let them try," Vivian said, her voice cold and unyielding. "I've already sent the evidence to multiple outlets. Journalists I trust. Independent investigators. Even if they kill me, it's too late to cover their tracks." "That's not the point," Marcus snapped. "I don't want to see you end up dead. Reynolds isn't just playing defense anymore. He's gone on the offensive. And Mason? He's panicking. Word is, he's trying to cut a deal to save his own skin." "Then let him squirm," Vivian said. "They've been protecting each other for too long. But now the walls are closing in." "Where are you going?" Marcus asked, his voice laced with worry. "Somewhere safe," she replied. "I need time to regroup, to figure out my next move. Just be careful, Vivian," Marcus pleaded. "They're not going to stop until you're either silenced or discredited. And if they can't destroy your reputation, they'll settle for destroying you." "I know," she said. "But I'm not running. I'm regrouping. There's a difference." The call ended, leaving Vivian alone with the hum of the engine and the weight of her own thoughts. She drove for hours, heading away from the city and into the quiet isolation of the countryside. When she finally pulled over, her shoulders ached from tension, her hands cramped from gripping the wheel. Vivian parked beside an old, abandoned farmhouse. The place had been recommended by a contact, a safe house known only to a few. She stepped out of the car, her legs unsteady, but her resolve as sharp as ever. The night air was cool, the silence oppressive. But Vivian welcomed it. It gave her time to think, to plan, and most importantly, to strike back. She entered the farmhouse and locked the door behind her. The space was sparse, furnished only with the essentials, but it was secure. Vivian set up her laptop and began reviewing the evidence she had collected. Every file, every recording, every scrap of information was carefully cataloged and cross-referenced. She worked through the night, her exhaustion forgotten in the face of her determination. By the time dawn broke over the horizon, she had formulated a plan that would force Reynolds and his protectors out into the open. Vivian sent out a series of encrypted messages to her allies. Journalists, whistleblowers, even a few politicians she knew could be trusted. She laid it all out for them: Reynolds's abuses, Mason's cover-ups, the entire rotten network. It was no longer about revenge. It was about exposing the truth, making sure the world saw Reynolds for what he truly was, making sure those who protected him were dragged into the light. Vivian closed her laptop and leaned back in her chair, her eyes burning from exhaustion. But the fire within her remained unquenched. They had tried to silence her, tried to destroy her, but she wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The war had only just begun. The story of Vivian Cross is a powerful reminder that courage, integrity, and resilience can overcome even the most entrenched systems of corruption and abuse. For seniors who have lived through decades of societal change, this narrative serves as both inspiration and validation. It speaks to the importance of standing firm against injustice, regardless of the risks or obstacles. Vivian's journey illustrates that it's never too late to fight for what is right, to demand accountability, and to leave a legacy built on truth and justice. Her persistence, her refusal to be silenced, resonates with those who have faced discrimination, oppression, or neglect. The lesson is clear. Speaking out against wrongdoing is not only a right, but a responsibility. Even when the opposition seems overwhelming, the truth is a force that cannot be silenced. This story also highlights the power of solidarity, how allies like Marcus and Sarah amplified Vivian's voice when she needed it most. In life, Finding those who share your values and your vision for a better world is crucial. If this story moved you or inspired you, please like, share, and subscribe. Help us spread more powerful stories of resilience, courage, and justice. Let's build a community where every voice matters, where truth triumphs over corruption, and where integrity is honored above all else. Your support means everything. Thank you for being part of this journey.